I'm Matt.
And I'm Nate.
And this is Not Quite Religious, a podcast where a Christian pastor and former evangelical turned atheist have conversations about faith, religion, philosophy, and life while drinking coffee.
Welcome to episode 40, where we're going to talk less philosophy today, even though we've been on a philosophy kick, and more about deconstructing evangelicalism and maybe mountain lion attacks.
Those two things are related, so I don't know how yet.
Satan roams around like a roaring lion waiting to devour.
Yeah, maybe.
I love that sometimes, often when I'm talking with evangelicals, more in a debate style, I often forget those verses that I had to memorize for seminary and for, Bible study. I mean, house church, which is completely different than Bible study. And I say that tongue in cheek.
No, it's the same thing.
Yeah. But every now and again, like just now, one will pop out. I couldn't tell you what chapter and verse it is, but it's in there.
Yeah, I think it's 1 Peter 5.
That sounds about right.
I'm still in the game, Nate.
The Gospel of Thecla, or the Acts of Thecla and Paul.
The Acts of what?
Thecla and Paul.
Okay.
So
maybe I'm not as much in the game as I thought.
I just watched a documentary on it. So Thecla was, besides the Marys, and was the most famous woman up in the church up until about 300 AD. Like Origen, Augustine, like all these church fathers talk about the Acts of Thecla and Paul. And it appears, at least to non-evangelical Old New Testament scholars, that potentially 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus were a direct, because most people think they're pseudographia, and Paul didn't actually write those. It seems like they're a direct attack on the Acts of Thecla and Paul, where Paul, in that book, baptizes Thecla. Tons of miracles happen around Thecla. Like she was essentially she's preaching the gospel, and they try to kill her, and they try to drown her, and God, they try to feed her to carnivorous seals. And, very much like Daniel, the seals' mouths get shut and then the water turns on fire, but Thecla doesn't burn. They try to feed her to pigs. And anyway, they try to kill her like 20 times. And not the emperor, but the ruler or the proconsul or whatever is like, try to kill her again. And finally it was like, never mind.
Yeah.
And it seems like Paul gave his blessing to her to preach and teach, which is in direct contradiction to 1 Timothy, where women are to be silent and, ask their husbands at home.
Right.
But it seems like, at least from an outside perspective, the church initially had a lot of women preachers, or at least condoned it and were for it. And then someone didn't like it and wrote Timothy and Titus and nipped that in the bud.
Where are you watching the documentary?
YouTube. It was one of the people I follow, the Genetically Modified Skeptic, who was an evangelical Christian who also, Are you familiar?
I've watched a couple of his videos.
He can be kind of annoying at times. Like, I like his content, but sometimes his voice just grates on me.
It wasn't my bag, and not because I had any necessarily strong feelings about the content. I actually didn't have super strong feelings about the content. I just wasn't my form of entertainment.
Yeah, he pops up on my YouTube feed occasionally. Like I said, I'm not I think I followed him back in the day. Paula Gia is probably my go-to right now. He's just clever.
That's a YouTube channel?
Yeah. He was a pastor and a radio host, so he's got a radio voice. And he has, my favorite segment, he has this thing called Ham and Eggs, where he bashes Ken Ham, or at least so it's like ham and eggs, and it's got a little animated Ken Ham head
that makes me
eating eggs.
That makes me want to go through other Christian apologists and be come up with something catchy like that. But.
So he, about once a week, he has longer videos. He has Bart Ehrman on a few times, and they do 1 hour, very scholarly. He debates a lot of the top people. He's at least respected enough that they will come on his show.
Yeah.
And there'll be 2 or 3 hour discussions around certain topics, mostly around historicity of the New Testament, miracles, things like that. But I mean, we're talking top level apologists, like McDowell's son, not Josh McDowell, but I forget what his son's
Yeah,
name is.
I don't remember his first name.
He's debated with who's the big one?
William Lane Craig?
Yeah, William Lane Craig. So he has so he's at least got some respect there. But so he'll have like some real content that's 30 minutes to an hour, but then once a week he just rips on Ken Ham's creationist show. You know the TV show that they have, and like they have they have like an hour show, and they just like talk about the new scientific discovery that humans and dinosaurs live together, and he's just like, and let's rip this apart.
YouTube suggested I watch a video the other day with Ken Ham and Kirk Cameron.
Oh God!
Like having a conversation about God knows what.
Yeah.
And I did I watched it for like 3 minutes before I was like, I can't do this. I can't do this with the next. I think the video was like 35 minutes or whatever. I was like, can't do this with the next. It was
Ken Ham and not Ray Comfort.
Yeah, it was Ken Ham and Kirk Cameron.
Okay, because that's funny because I'm pretty sure Ray Comfort and Ken Ham don't like always see eye to eye.
I have not seen Ray Comfort on my algorithm in a long time.
Because he's the one who discipled.
Yeah, they did a thing called Way of the Master way back in the day, like early 2000s, something like that. Yeah,
showed that bananas are perfectly formed to our hand. And then other Christian apologists are like, actually, don't use this. It's an argument. And he actually gave it up. He gave up the banana argument.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole banana argument. I think you know why my theory why he gave it up, because Jordan Peterson one-upped him with the lobster. I'm
not familiar with Jordan Peterson's lobster.
I'm not really familiar either. Sometimes I just throw out references, like hoping people will get them, and then when they don't, I'm in this corner.
Yeah, I know you're stuck.
But apparently he said something about a lobster a few years ago that a lot of like philosophers and scientists like make fun of. It's really not as absurd as Ray Comfort's banana argument.
For those who are unfamiliar, Ray Comfort shows design instead of evolution by saying a banana fits in a hand perfectly. So it's clearly designed to fit there because it has 5 things, just like we have 5 creases in our fingers, this and that. And a lot of even other evangelical young earth creationists were like, that's not how this thing works.
Yeah. I think Peterson's lobster argument is like a psychological thing, because as far as I know, he's not a Christian.
I don't know. He's had some videos that have come up, at least on my reels, where he's like, he's probably not a Christian, but he thinks that we should found our democracy and civilization on Christianity, and going to church is like a good thing, even if you don't believe.
Right. But
which is like really weird.
In terms of evolutionary science, I don't think he's not a creationist.
Or if he is, he's much more clockmaker creation.
No, I think he goes that far. I think he's just the mainstream Earth is billions of years old, kind of,
and flat.
No. So
he's not a flat earther.
No, I don't think so. I think what I'm saying is his lobster argument is probably coming from his views on psychology.
Gotcha.
I'll make a point to familiarize myself with the Jordan Peterson lobster argument.
In our break, we can quickly
and then really
leave listeners on the edge of their seats till the next week.
Right, because if you say hashtag Jordan Peterson, we might get even more hits.
That's true.
This might actually just end up being our most listened to podcast ever.
17 whole people. So we're off to a great start. Should we talk? We've talked about bananas, lobsters. This might be the perfect segue into mountain lions.
Okay. I'm still wondering when we're going to get to the coffee, but there's not much to say about it.
Yeah. So I guess my mountain lion story is I had a mountain lion about 1 mile from my house, and I almost hit it with my car. But
when?
Pre-COVID.
Okay.
So at least 3 years ago. And there's a Facebook page dedicated to the mountain lion at the Quabbin. We live about a 10-minute drive from the Quabbin, probably about 5 miles. And Massachusetts still says mountain lions don't exist, but definitely exist in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. So, coffee.
It's the same one that it was last episode. The Share coffee. What the name of it?
Comfort.
The Comfort.
Yeah. And I had the Adventure before you got. I was drinking Adventure when you got here because I couldn't wait till 11.
Right. I'm tasting a lot more like cherry in this
Yeah.
than I was last week.
You liking it better? Was it just I brewed a 2 week last week? You think?
Maybe. No, I don't like it better because that's just because
I hate cherries.
No, I actually like cherries, but I don't like my coffee like fruity. It's not my preferred zone. I'm in the chocolatey, nutty, smoky side of things, which is people that are in that range usually don't like.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Like fruity and vice versa.
Yeah.
So it's not my style, but again, same just like genetically modified skeptics at my style. It's not to say that it's bad. It's not my thing.
I think I agree with you. I don't know if I tasted cherry, but I had 2 roasts to go with for myself, and I went with the Adventure, which is the first one we got, which I think we both rated higher than this.
Yeah,
and it was my last one, or I would have made you that too.
Yeah,
but
I'm gonna give it. I think if I'm being truly objective and forgetting about the fact that like I don't like fruity, and that doesn't mean that it's not good.
Yeah,
it just means it's not my thing. I think this is a solid 8.
There you go.
I don't have a mountain lion story though.
Yeah,
and I also don't have a deconstruction story. Which
you do because you're not a reformed evangelical anymore, or maybe you decide to find yourself as evangelical, but you're definitely not reformed. So that's a little bit of deconstruction. You don't have a deconversion story.
That's true. I feel out of the loop of like, there are groups. There's deconstruction. It's a thing. It's like a community.
Yeah, they wear like a badge of honor,
and sort of, or like a badge of shame, but the same way that the same way like goth kids and emo kids wore shame in the 90s.
Right.
I'm a deconstruct.
Right. Yeah, they're at least identifying with that group of people and finding a community based on this word. Right.
But I have found over the years that this doesn't sound too braggadocious. Like I'm my thoughts, my public thoughts online or on this podcast or whatever are appreciated by those who do identify as deconstructing, and I identified as an emergent back in the day for a while, which is not different. I don't think not that much different.
I mean, everyone loved Blue Like Jazz.
Yeah.
But were you like Rob Bell, Love Wins? Did you go that far? Like when Piper tweeted...
I thought Love Wins was mild.
Okay. Because I was in seminary. I was in seminary class. And it was like our break. And Piper tweeted, farewell Rob Bell.
Yeah.
And everyone was like on their laptops Googling what happened, and like Love Wins hadn't
the Reformed Pope excommunicated.
Yeah. And like no one could even get a hand. He must have gotten an advance copy or something because Love Wins hadn't even been published. So we're all like, "What's going on?" Because before that, like Rob Bell was emergent, but he was still people would still have called him a Christian. I don't think now Reformed people like they wouldn't identify him in.
Right. Well, even in the 90s, Mark Driscoll was part of what was being called which is interesting to think about.
Yeah. I mean, he even wore that badge for a while.
Right, but then it was like much more of a broad, general kind of movement about, and he even explains this, I think, in one of his sermons, like, there were people in the movement that were in it because they realized that the evangelistic methodology needed to change in order to fit the emerging Generation X culture, essentially.
Yeah. They were like, Josh McDowell doesn't work anymore.
Right.
We need relationships and cool guitars and candles.
Right. But as the conversation kept going, they realized that there were people that were trying to emerge from not just evangelical missiology, but trying to emerge from evangelical theology. Right. And so Mark Driscoll got off the train, and the movement became really a theological movement rather than like a methodological movement. Right. So then, to me, the real... I don't know if it's like a founder, but like when Emergent Village started, when that became a thing, I think Driscoll had jumped off at that point and it was Brian McLaren's thing. So
Yeah.
Brian McLaren's the first name I think of when I think of emergent or emerging. Those two names are interchangeable. But so Brian McLaren, and then Blue Like Jazz was kind of like,
I think everyone could get down with Blue Like. It wasn't.
It was like kind of in the middle.
McLaren wasn't quite a heretic when I started being a Christian, but by the time I was a pastor, it was like, that guy is not a Christian. Like, he's a wolf at best, and apostate, or I guess apostate at best and a wolf at worst.
Yeah.
Where people were still like, Blue Like Jazz is a fun book. Although, and then it turned out like 90% of it was potentially a lie.
Right. And Rob Bell felt different. Like, he felt like he could like hang out with the emergent guys, at that time, we're talking mid 2000s. The emergent guys were still like obsessing over like, we need a new church for a new age kind of conversations. And Rob Bell didn't talk like that at all. Rob Bell was really talking about, we need a new lens with which to view the scriptures, particularly like the Hebrew scriptures. So if you watch like his Numas from the early days, like he's busting out his knowledge of like ancient Hebrew and go, here's one way to understand it, but here's another way that we could understand it. So Rob Bell, especially in the beginning days, was somebody that I latched onto. And then also eventually Shane Claiborne with the Simple Way.
It's familiar, but I don't think I ever read him.
And he's kind of lumped in with it, but he like...
Was he part of Shane and Shane?
No.
I just have to remind our listeners every now and again that I had actual evangelical cred.
Yeah. For real. No, Shane Claiborne did like a kind of, I don't know, it's like he's got kind of a hippie Mennonite inner city ministry in Philadelphia.
I want to go visit that, even as an atheist, because like,
they basically live in a commune and try to practice Christianity from that point of view.
So like modern day monks.
Kind of, yeah. Like, and they're into, well, certain kinds of activism, like they're very active in like prison reform, and they're active in race relations, and they're active in homelessness and poverty, and
I mean, it seems Quaker Mennonite.
Right. It's very much like that, and so I was attracted to that. And by that time, I was into that. It was kind of like the stuff that McLaren and Toby Jones and those people that were obsessed with a new way of speaking and a new kind of theology weren't as interesting to me as Bell and Claiborne. But, then I moved to Vermont and took over an older congregation and an evangelical church, and was away from the bubble. So I think that ironically, some of the people that are in the midst of deconstructing are still not that far away from the bubble.
Yeah.
So they're like on Facebook arguing with their uncles. Yeah. Like they and people, and they're still going to the church. They're still going to like a conservative evangelical church, but then they'll go home and complain about that and complain about it privately. And then there's like a process, like you can almost tell. You got about, at this point, if you're beginning to start complaining about evangelical church that you're going to, you probably got about 5 years before you're full deconstruct. So,
I mean, it depends on your type of complaint, right? Because there are like there's complaints about theology that you'd find at every evangelical church, which yes, I think then you're about 5 years on. But there's also just like, this church worship leader is not
yeah.
Right. And I think those people are just like, well, there's two types. There's one who's like, this is my church and I'm supposed to stay here and help fix the problems. And then there are others who are like, man, this church is jacked. I believe their theology, but I need to find a church that has a better worship leader or like a kids program or something.
Right. So I've kind of avoided this topic in a podcast episode because it's not interesting to me. Sorry, like I've been through it and through it for myself, and then with people, and it's the same. It's kind of the same talking points, but then I also realize that it's not about me, right? Like there are people in our audience who maybe could benefit from my thoughts on it. I just don't know where the launch pad is to start, because I think everybody's skepticism about their evangelicalism is, well, there's a bunch of similarities, but not everybody's, I think, is identical. It's not, maybe I shouldn't say it that way. It's just, it's not a one size fits all kind of thing. It doesn't take everybody the same gears. It's not the same problems that, for one person, it could be like very rational and logical. Like this theology just doesn't make sense to me anymore. Something happens during a sermon, and he goes, "Wait a minute," and he starts trying to connect this verse to this verse. And
well, like for me, the first
you can't
crack,
harmonize it.
Yeah, the first crack was my professor giving me an A- on my theology paper because I wasn't a young Earth creationist. And he was like, "You proved your points, but because you're not a young Earth creationist," and that wasn't. Like, you didn't have to be a young Earth creationist to attend Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. It wasn't in their statement of faith.
Wow. But that particular
professor, and the paper was on, could animal death have occurred before the fall? And my premise was yes, because and Adam and Eve were supposed to be vegetarians before the fall. But that doesn't mean that there weren't microscopic insects, because we know, like, tomato bugs are really small, and they're eating tomato, and it goes, like, does the tomato bug come out the other side alive and kicking? And I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. No, and I used some scriptures and this and that, and he was like, yeah, you proved your point, but, like, no. And that was the first crack where I was like, but...
Did that surprise you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the first crack where I was like, well, if I proved my point, even if you disagree with it, if I use scriptures and I use logic and I use rationale, and like everything was correct, even if you disagreed with the correctness. Like when I was in my political science major, like for physics, it was very much like gravity is 9.81 meters per second, right? Like when you did a lab, you needed to get that number. And if you got something different, you did the lab wrong. In political science, it was much more like read this book, read Foucault, read Camus, or read your book on international relations or, Adam Smith, and then write an essay about a topic and a perspective. And the professor could be like, I completely disagree with your politics, but based on what we read and your understanding of the book, you proved your point. And so if you did that, you'd get an A, regardless if the professor, like my favorite professor was a hardcore Republican. He worked in the Bush administration. And like, we didn't see eye to eye because I'm a liberal and I was then. But like, we had a great working relationship and like we could disagree, but on my papers, I proved my point and I would get the good grade. If I didn't, I would get a bad grade. So for seminary to have a professor be like, you proved your point, but you're just wrong because I have an a priori assumption. I was like that, like, and I was like, whoa, what other things are bleeding in here that I didn't see before? And that's where I started thinking a little more critically. So that was the crack.
Yeah.
And the straw that broke the back, sorry for the unintended poetry, was the Ken Ham Bill Nye debate.
Yeah.
Which we've talked about before.
Right. Yeah, so you didn't grow up in a fundamentalist or evangelical household?
No, my whole family was Irish Catholic, varying degrees of lapsed.
Yeah. I just want to observe also that, like, that is so anti-educational to, like...
Yeah.
And that seminary's not the only one that's like that. If any evangelical Southern Baptist, kind of seminary, I went to a Baptist seminary, it's the same thing. It kind of goes... I had a couple professors that were a little more like, I disagree, I'm concerned about your soul, but it's a well-written paper, I'm giving you an A.
Yeah.
But there were others that would have done the same thing that your professor did to you. And what that means is essentially, like, we're not just testing your ability to do theology, we're also testing whether or not you have the right theology, namely ours.
Yes.
Which then is just, it's not even covert indoctrination.
Right.
It just is indoctrination.
Yeah.
If that's how your grade, because you're like, oh, I want an A, so instead of like actually doing real critical thinking and saying what I really think because I want to now I'm just going to forever write what I know you think is the truth. And I can make that case as, I might have to take a shower afterwards.
Well, and like, if I remember my argument correctly, it was that after the coming, second coming, we're all back, right? We get the tree of life again, except now there's 12 trees. And it's sort of as I understood Revelation, was taught Revelation, it's a reverse Genesis. Mm-hmm. So you start off with everything broken and you get to everything fixed. Everything sad becomes untrue, to use Keller's terms, right? But if you look at some of the Hebrew scriptures, in that new heaven and new earth, which is a mirror of Eden, you're eating the fat of the calf. Like you're actually eating meat in there. So start off vegetarian, you end up eating meat. But it's a reverse Genesis, right? Which means that if you accidentally ate meat, my argument was if you accidentally ate meat pre-fall, that also would have died. And I don't think there's anything controversial with saying that.
Right.
But it apparently was enough to knock a few points off my grade.
Yeah.
And I want to just say, as I remember, to the best of my ability, right? Like I'm sure I'm misremembering details.
Yeah. So for some people, the thing that starts poking holes is the theology and the teaching itself. So people are looking at the text. They actually, for the first time, come in their 20s and instead of just relying on what their teachers are saying, open the Bible, they notice contradictions within the Bible itself, or they notice contradictions between what their preacher is saying and what's going on in the real world. Some people deconstruct because somebody abused them, because somebody did some heinous. It might even be personal. It might be a thing I saw one too many preachers get caught up in scandal.
Right.
This was the last one, and it makes them think if this is a pattern, it's not an outlier. If there's a pattern of continued people from the same tradition falling in relatively the same ways, like adultery or messing with kids or whatever, you're maybe it's not an accident. Maybe it's embedded systemically in the culture, and that can get people's wheels spinning too. So there's the point being there's different things that sort of open the deconstruction door for people, and I really don't know what it was for me. And again, I have a hard time just slapping that label on. That may be more because I have a hard time with labels in general. Because one of the differences is that I make a valiant effort to be orthodox, even though I fail over and over again. And I feel like most deconstructs are making a valiant effort to explain Christianity in a heretical way. This is the difference between me and them. So I make a valiant effort towards orthodoxy and just keep failing over and over again. But for me, what I can take it back to, my therapist might say it goes way farther back than this, but for me, and it's really silly, but there was this Christian band in the mid-2000s called House of Heroes. And I went to one of those Christian concerts. I think this one was called Creation. It's basically like a Christian Woodstock where they get a bunch of cheesy Christian rock bands to go to the same place. And they have a main stage and they have a fringe stage. And I always liked the fringe stage better because there's bands I never heard of. That was interesting to me. The main stage would be like the Newsboys and DC Talk and and then the fringe stage would be like this band, House of Heroes. And I liked them, and so I bought their album. And the first song on their album, the lyrics were, "Shut up if you want to get paid. What's your options? Cold corruption or starvation?" And it was basically it was very political, and it was left. And that was the first time I ever encountered something that had the combination of being Christian, being left, and sounding exactly right. and from that point, it made everything that sounded politically conservative sound really wrong. Like I could never unhear Jesus as I could never see him as anything but against the status quo. Like as being a revolutionary.
Yeah.
Which, since my understanding of like what a revolutionary is not so liberals are revolutionaries and conservatives are status quo. I think in 2023 it's all just jacked up. And none of those labels really apply. But at the time it was like that's how I thought about it. That was my paradigm. I'm 22 years old. Something like that. So my paradigm's pretty simplistic, and it's just like if you're anti-status quo, that means that you're liberal. Conservatives are trying to conserve the status quo. Right. Liberal. So it's like the fact that I heard these people talking about Jesus in this way that made him basically anti-establishment, anti-religious establishment, anti-political establishment was like, first of all, that's a Jesus that was way easier for me to like. And also just kept lining up with what I was seeing in the Gospels. And which made like the Pharisees keep lining up with what the conservatism that I understood, which is all I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a more nuanced take than the one I'm presenting, but for me that's where it started. And so with that little kind of caricature it was like and maybe that has something to do with the fact that I grew up in a church that was very politically active in a in a conservative way. And my early 20s, I was rebelling against that. But for me, that's what that song, that left-leaning song, was it what broke the doors open.
We had a similar concert thing. I forget what it's called, but it was in Loon Mountain every year. Same thing, big band on the big stage, and then 2 side stages where it was 20 people.
Yeah, yeah. This one was in Middle Pennsylvania. I think it was called Creation. But there's one in Michigan or Ohio called Alive.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah, I don't remember what the Loon Mountain one was, but
yeah. So then, I just started developing a distaste for anything that sounded, like the what I would call like the cultural ignorance, the willful cultural ignorance of conservative evangelicalism. Like, just gets under my skin. Still to this day.
So about 6 months after my deconversion, I had some Facebook friends that I no longer have who were pretty politically evangelical, as well as, church plant reformed. And I have some Black and African American friends who were part of my congregation. I used to be pretty close to, and we've drifted apart. But at that time, I don't think it was Trayvon Martin, but there was something that happened that, sort of the Black people in my circle and African Americans in my circles started being a little more vocal on Facebook about systematic oppression, and that they've all been stopped by the police for no reason, and that they've seen brutality. And not to say that all cops are bad, but they're like explaining their experience of like, and this guy was like, "You're wrong." Like, white dude from the South moved up to New York, and I'm like talking to these people. I'm like, "Hey, I hear you. I see you. Like, let me know what I can do." And some of them were like, "Well, we have a town meeting next week coming up in Amherst. Like, and, this Black teacher we think got fired unfairly, and so we're going before the school board, and would love for you to come and hear both sides. And, if you decide to support us, support us." And I was like, sure, like, those are small things I can do. Like, I'm not... And this other guy, like, every time they comment, the Black and African American people commented on something, he'd be like, "You're wrong. You're stupid." And he wouldn't straight out call them stupid. But, like, willfully ignorant to the fact that they're like, this has been my experience, right? Like, I got stopped driving while Black. Like, I was going the speed limit. I stopped at the stop sign. I used the blinker, and I was still pulled over. And he's like, "Well, you must have done something." And they're like, "I didn't." Right? So instead of just hearing their experience, I don't want to make this about Black Lives Matter or anything. Like, the point is, like, instead of hearing their experience and listening to where they're coming from. Now, these were Christians, and I'm identifying with them. And I'm like, dude, like, these are supposed to be your brothers and sisters, and you're not listening to them. And me, the apostate, is saying, man, that sucks. I didn't realize that happened to you.
Right.
How can I help?
And to me, your response is Christ-like. That was another big thing on my journey for me when things started ramping up politically. I think towards like the mid-2000s, it felt like things, maybe on the dawn of social media or whatever, when people were actually conversing about these things. And I was so disillusioned by how, because to me it was like, how should a Christian respond to someone who's like, hey, I'm suffering. Okay, let me try and understand. Like, I don't know, that's like, I can't think of any other way for a Christian to respond.
Yeah.
And so the fact that Christians weren't responding knee-jerk that way, but rather like,
no, you're not.
This is reverse racism or whatever.
That wasn't even a term. They basically were like, no, you're not.
Right. I'm like, you're not even going to listen?
Yeah.
Like, Jesus went headlong into like, look at this prostitute. Like, she's forgiven. And you're just going to be like, your stories, nobody else's story matters.
Right.
Just our narrative.
And framework.
It seemed so unchristian. That was the thing that baffled me. And that was really disillusioning. I think there's probably some listeners who have the same thing, maybe different like political issues where you go, is this even about what I thought it was about? Yeah. Like, is this about kindness, gentleness, meekness, love, compassion, mercy? Words that are used over and over and over and over and over and over again. Granted, juxtaposed against other things that are used over and over again. But I think most people think like Christianity, love, joy, mercy, peace, all these kinds of things you hang up on your wall that you bought at like a Hallmark store or something.
The wedding verses, love is patient, love is kind.
Right. And then Christians are like, just, yeah, I can, you know what I'm saying? Like, I see that can be disillusioning.
So this is really, did you watch the Emmys? Or have you had Facebook controversy around the Emmys?
I've chosen to stay out of it.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of myself. I haven't commented. I haven't given my opinion on it. No.
So
I didn't watch it.
Yeah. I don't know who watches the Emmys. Like, I don't know, maybe just because I don't have cable TV.
You talking about the Grammys?
Grammys, yeah.
With the, like, Grammys. With the guy, the people in the red coats, like
dressed up as Satan.
Yeah.
So this just goes back to like the kindness. So for me, I'm like, they're trolling you, right?
Right.
Like Lil Nas X, which was the controversy 2 years ago when he had a relationship with Satan in his music video. Mm-hmm. He was trolling evangelicals.
Right.
And he straight up said, like, I was one of you. You made my life miserable. I really am trolling you. And he's a master troll. Because, like, even after saying that, people were arguing with him. And he's just trolling them more.
Right.
Like, clearly dressing up like Satan on a song about adultery and, like, I forget the name of the song. Like, it's trolling.
Uh-huh.
Right? And some of my evangelical friends are like, see, it is a spiritual battle. And their words were, mm-hmm. we need to stop being kind and start going to war. Mm-hmm. And I was like, love is patient, love is kind, love forgives all things, love does no wrong. Like,
plus, what do you mean? What do you mean go to war? Do you mean like meme wars? Or do you mean like we're going to arm ourselves with...
Oh, with the sword of the Spirit, man.
Or like
full armor of God.
Or like AR-15s. What do you mean war?
Yeah. But I'm just like... I'm watching this, I'm like, that is the most unchristian response to a troll I can possibly imagine.
Right.
Like for me, at least when I was an evangelical, my response, and I know this would be my response, because when I was an evangelical, the Wrecking Ball video came out with Miley Cyrus naked.
Yeah.
And everything was covered so it could air on TV, but she was clearly nude. Uh-huh. And there was like this outcry by evangelicals about like, how can we do this and our kids? And again, this is satanic and there's a war on our culture and we need to take up arms. And I was like, man, I feel really bad for this lady. like she was pimped out by her parents at a very young age
Yep.
to be a Disney or Nickelodeon star. I forget which one. Like when you hear stories about young child actors, they usually end in heartbreak. Now, some of them, like it seems like Miley Cyrus and a few others have made it into an adult career, and how happy they are, I don't know. But I was like, you know, she was like 18, 19 at the time. I was like, some producer was like, get naked and get on this ball.
Right.
I'm like, how about our response is like, man, I feel really, really bad for this person.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to shame anyone if like if you're an adult and you want to make a choice to get naked and get on a wrecking ball, like I'm not saying you're a bad person, but I am saying sometimes very broken people do things that they wouldn't normally do because they're so broken they know how to do nothing else. Right?
Right.
And so, like, if I was an evangelical today, I think my response to, I think it was Sam Smith who dressed up as the devil, would be like, man, like, I'm going to pray for him. If he wants to have a conversation, like, clearly he's like in a very dark place. And I would say that even if he's trolling us, like, what can we do to make him stop trolling? Like, how can we help him to not be a troll?
Also, why is he trolling us? And I mean that seriously, like, because they, whoever, his church, did something to him.
Right.
And he's exacting revenge. I mean, and there's two ways you can look at that. You could be like, oh, it's like a prank war. A never-ending, an escalating prank war. You know how those go. Like, eventually somebody crosses the line.
Someone gets hit by a car.
Right.
They're like, ah!
How do you stop the escalation? You either ignore the trolling or you see the humanity in it.
Yeah.
You go, where's this actually coming from?
Yeah.
And
say maybe there's something here.
And maybe there's something I can take responsibility for, rather than like use this as an opportunity to further, late 70s moral majority propaganda.
Yeah.
Reagan era propaganda. Maybe that's not the route to go. Maybe I can be like, okay, so I was part of a culture that Sam was raised in, that he felt rejected by, that he felt ostracized by, that he felt alienated by because of his sexual desires. Let me process that. Yeah. Let's think about that. And maybe I actually do find it aesthetically distasteful to go that way, but at the same time I get that it's trolling. It actually isn't his artistic expression. It's just like, how will they react? Oh, they reacted in exactly the way I thought and hoped they would.
And ironically, in their reaction, probably started more people on a deconstruction journey.
Sure.
And got him a ton more clicks and likes.
Sure. Sure.
Right. All publicity is good publicity, right? So all these evangelicals posting links to the video, getting mad about it. Number one, shares the video a lot more, gets him more like...
Yeah. But, progressives do the same thing with conservative trolls all the time.
It's true. Yeah.
Like, it's the same thing.
It's sort of why I stopped debating on Facebook, because I was like, everyone's a troll.
Right.
Unless people are posting pictures about, like, please pray or send thoughts for my grandma, she went to the hospital, or my baby was just born, or happy birthday so-and-so. Like, it's all just trolling.
Right.
At least the discussions are.
Yeah, I think I agree. Troll seems like a strong word, but everybody's being provocative. Everybody's trying to be seen. Everybody's trying to be heard. And everybody, for whatever reason on social media, forgets that no one wants to be persuaded.
Right.
No one's trying to be persuaded.
Yeah.
No one's trying to change their worldview. And there's no way you can present yourself as somebody so brilliant that somebody in an instant, because they're scrolling their Facebook page, does a double take on your post and goes, wait, let me go back to that. This is genius. I'm a new person now because Matt said this. This is never going to happen.
Yeah. I think especially on controversial topics or political or religious topics, everyone's virtue signaling.
Right.
Like I think some of the pastors who shared, or evangelicals who shared, like, if I don't share this, they're going to think I liked that he dressed up as Satan.
Right.
And I'm like, just post pictures of your puppies, man. Like, that's why I'm starting to be more on Instagram than Facebook.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like, oh, that's a cool food pic. Oh, that's a cool video. Like,
right. couple years ago, and I'm not necessarily proud of this. I just went through a phase, especially through COVID, when we weren't like active in the world. I went through a bad phase where I was way too. I wasn't a troll, but I would just get into Facebook debates. More get into them than start them. Every once in a while I would start them. But there was this one person that posted about like virtue signaling. So I just said, so you're virtue signaling your anti-virtue signaling. You know, like
Right.
it's absurd.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. And what it really is, and this goes back to what you were saying, and what I wanted to turn it around to, which applies not only to Sam Smith, but also, or Nas, or Lil Nas, or whatever, but it applies to, deconstructing Christians as well, which is, look, being human is really hard. And there's not, I wish there were more people in your life that were telling you that. And there probably are people in your life telling you that, but you're going on social media hoping that you're going to get that feeling of worth, meaning, value from there in the comments. But for every positive comment you get that says, you're a hero, you're awesome, keep doing the thing that you're doing, there are 5 that are like the meanest things you've ever heard in your life that no one would ever say to your face.
Yeah. So I very rarely comment. I'll comment on other people's posts, but some of the news organizations that I follow, I very rarely comment. And I commented on something recently. They were talking about like this new miracle for food that could feed the whole world. And I was like, all the economic and like all the experts say that there's enough food to feed everyone now. The problem is corruption, greed, and systems to get it there. Mm-hmm. Those are 3 fixable solutions. And like some people, like you said, like were like, yeah, like this and that. And other people like, so those people who make the food shouldn't get the money? And I was like, I didn't actually say that. I said the 3 problems to getting food places are corruption, greed, and supply chains. Mm-hmm. All of those can be fixed, right? And like, I didn't even say it was the greed of, General Mills. Like a lot of times it's the greed of generals and presidents, quote unquote, in these countries that have food shortages. Because they're like NATO and the Red Cross like send food and they steal it.
Right.
Right? And the amount of negative comments from people who are just like, I'm apparently an idiot and need to educate myself. Mm-hmm. I'm like, dude, all I said was like, there is actually, like, this article was like, there'll be enough food for everyone. I'm like, there is now. Mm-hmm. Or like, producing more isn't necessarily the solution to the problem. Because if the problem is corruption, I don't care how much food you produce, the corrupted people are just going to keep taking it.
Right. It seems intuitive that the problem is scarcity, but the problem isn't scarcity.
Right. But it was back to your, like, for every one positive comment, there's 5 negative. And like, I didn't expect the amount of negative hate I got. I think it was like a New York Times or Wall Street Journal article. But like, I've learned since deconverting to just not engage. Yeah. So like, I posted my comment in response to the author. It was like, I think you're missing the point. I'm going to put this out there. And then all the negative people, even some of the positive people, I wasn't like, thanks, man. Like, I don't know you. Like, cool, you liked my post. But I'm like, at least smart enough to know, like, engaging with these people who are calling me an idiot and like trying to teach me a lesson on economics 101. I'm like, right. There's no benefit to me replying to them at all. In fact, it's all just negative. Which to bring it back to Lil Nas X and Sam Smith is why I'm not commenting on these people's posts.
Yeah.
It's not worth the energy. I mean, some of them legit. So some social media, some Instagram, they shared, they're not evangelical. It was a news site, and they shared the video of Sam Smith's performance, and they were like, worship, right? Uh-huh. And the evangelicals were like, see, it is satanic worship. Uh-huh. Like, you need to educate yourself about the satanic temple, which is not, like, doesn't actually believe in Satan, right. Is the irony of it, right? It's Christians who believe in Satan, not the satanic temple people. Yep. And I'm like, they're using worship as slang. Like, it's like a thing my kids say. They're like, worship. They also say, like, LW, Riz, like, sus. I'm like, you just don't know, like, that worship for the generation that is premillennial.
Yeah.
Like whatever the new name is, like
Yeah.
it doesn't mean what you think it means.
And they know that you don't know that. They know that you don't use worship as a slang. So,
you mean the generation that's using the slang?
Right.
Yeah, I mean slang's always supposed to let the teenagers talk without the adults knowing.
Right.
Right.
But I'm saying like Smith or whatever, is that the thing you're talking about where the lyrics of the song are worship?
No, someone tweeted like worship and then posted his performance. And so what they're saying is like what they meant is like, this is really good.
Yeah.
This is great. Like
Right.
like worship.
Right.
Right? Which they use for everything. Like, how do you like my dress? Worship.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
Like you're slaying, goddess, right? Like when you're like, oh, you slay, it doesn't mean you're actually killing things, right? It means like it's really good. When you say like you have riz, right? Like it's the new term for like, do you have game?
Right.
Right?
I learned that one a couple weeks ago. I had to Google it.
Luckily, my teenagers are very willing to share the
I don't have teenagers yet, and by the time that I do, the slang will be different.
So, yes. So, because this person posted worship and then the video, my evangelical friends have shared that specific Instagram, being like, see, they are worshiping Satan. Therefore, we now need, and they're trying to appropriate our culture, even though they told us they weren't. Now we need to put on the full armor of God and get ready for battle. And I'm like, you've been appropriating the culture for 2,000 years. Get off your goddamn high horse and understand that some people don't have to be Christian. And just because someone dresses up like the devil doesn't mean that they actually are worshiping Satan. And probably aren't. Because the people who believe in Satan would never dress up as Satan. Unless it's for, what do the evangelicals do on Halloween and like have the fake abortion people and the haunted houses that aren't haunted houses that are to scare you, scared straight type you know what I'm talking about? Like that's when they have someone dressed up as Satan and they're like poking people in hell.
Right.
But like no secular person is dressing up as Satan in an attempt to worship Satan because we don't believe he's real.
Right.
So it's just like it blows my mind. And just to sort of put a button in it, these Christians, these evangelicals who are now stating outright, it's a war, we need to win, this performance is satanic, like they have just started the next snowball of deconstructions. Because people are like, I listen to Sam Smith, he's got a good voice. Why all of a sudden he's satanic? Why is watching the Grammys worshiping Satan? And they're going to start thinking like something doesn't add up here. So ironically, in the attempt to win, they're shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah. I have some things to say about that, but we're running up against the clock.
I mean, we got a few minutes.
So yeah, to me it's funny that they're appropriating our culture because I had a thought there, and when you were saying that, but then it just left me as you were talking. But that just strikes me as funny because, again, they're making fun of your culture.
Right.
And you could be mad about that.
Yeah.
Because no one likes to be made fun of. It's even funnier that you think that it's appropriation. Which is like you're both being owned again, and also being self-owning yourself, like with the same act.
Yeah.
And again, it's not just like this isn't just a.
And your goal is not to get owned; it's to convert people to your religion. And you're so pwned, you're driving people away.
Is it though? It's like, is the goal actually to get people to join your religion, or is the goal to feel like you're out in front of culture?
I probably a little of both, but I do believe they're sincere when they're like, we want to save souls.
Yeah, see, that's one of the things that I started to doubt along the way. That was one of the things that I got a little bit disillusioned about.
Not all evangelicals, not all pastors, but at least some of the people that I saw post.
Yeah.
As far as I know, in my relationships with them,
Yeah.
they're sincere in their desire
Yeah, and I just want to say that it's not just evangelicals that can get owned this way. It's not like a quality that only boomer
right
evangelicals have. It's something that happens a lot, I think, to leftists. A lot. There are lots of conservative trolls. There's this whole saying on the internet, like the left can't meme.
Yeah.
And there's like some truth to it.
Yeah, no.
There's a lot of like really naive leftists out there that don't know their
Fox News owns them all the time.
Like, right.
And they don't, and I'm like, stop agreeing to go on Fox News. You're gonna come off looking like an idiot.
Yeah. And it's partly because like there's a whole world that people don't understand. I don't know. I think I'll just leave it at that. There was another seemingly unrelated thing I wanted to keep talking about.
We have another episode to record.
I know, that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
Is like we have another episode to record, because one of the topics you were talking about, or subtopics that was super interesting, was when I brought up the point about like willful cultural ignorance, and you then brought up the issues of race. I was like really thinking of more subtle kind of weirdness. Like you were telling me before this episode, the story about the wedding.
Oh yeah.
Where it's like sometimes growing up, I felt like
doing an altar call at the wedding.
Yeah, like Christians
like
weren't
a weird thing.
Aware of it, and yet they were, right? So like everybody's participating in this, what I would call evangelical custom, but most of the people participating in it are well aware that it's culturally weird.
Yeah.
And there's a pressure to not call out the cultural weirdness because you don't want to be branded as not part of the evangelical thing.
Yeah, having an altar call at your wedding is weird. Even
if
you're
weird.
Evangelical. Because who's going up to the altar?
Right. But even this idea that you would go to church on Sunday and your pastor would be like, you have to be witnessing to your friends. And you're like, okay, I'm going to try really hard to do that this week. But you have built relationships with people at work or school or at the coffee shop, not on the foundation of your evangelicalism,
right,
but on the foundation of something else. So for you to like suddenly introduce, like, okay, you want to talk about Jesus today? They're like, where's this coming from? And you're doing it out of this guilt that your pastor laid on you on Sunday. You feel weird. You don't even want to do it. They feel weird. They don't want to be proselytized. And now they're wondering if the relationship they built with you was authentic or just a means for you to proselytize them. And you don't want them to think that that's what the relationship was built on, because the relationship wasn't actually built on that. But now because you're trying to like feel better about being a Christian, so now you're in this place where you can't actually form genuine relationships with non-Christians, and you sort of have to make a choice whether or not that's possible. And I think when part of my deconstruction was also like making the choice that I felt like, no, I want to have authentic relationships with people. I want people to be able to feel like they can tell me, I don't want to talk about faith with you. And me, and I'll go, okay, that's not a thing that we have to talk about. And I imagine that there are a lot of deconstructing Christians that have felt that weirdness, and feel like they're living a double life. One at church and a house church, and one at work and school or whatever. And they're trying to bridge it, and eventually they decide that going to their weird church is the better option than they're left in this place. It's like, either I just go full-fledged into this weirdness, or I just become a normal person who has, I think at first they're like, oh, I have these beliefs about God, but then eventually when you're away from the indoctrination bubble, those break down too. So then you just become a normal person.
Yeah. I got some thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Deconstruction, mountain lions, black people's rights.
Part 2? Are you thinking about like a title?
I have no idea. Hashtag Jordan Peterson, which we didn't even really talk about him, but yeah, I don't know how to end.
I love all you guys. I hope if you're an evangelical and listening, you didn't feel too crapped on by me. I'm not going to speak for Nate.
I hope you feel crapped on too, but stop sharing that Sam Smith was worship, because it's not.
And to my deconstructing friends, I hope that this was beneficial to you in some way. What I really actually hope for my deconstructed friends is that they find somewhere to land that gives them peace and meaning. Yeah. That's what I hope for everyone, actually. So
I can second that. Have a great week.